Awesome. So welcome everyone. Today we got Kim, who's controls all the backroom stuff. We'll be monitoring questions. Um, Very good point by Lane that asked, did Jordan get that interception record because of all the interceptions Ed was throwing? So that is, dang, that is right out of the top turnbuckle early on. I actually like that. And that probably is accurate. He was not when I was there. Otherwise, he would have set the national record if I was playing against him on that side. So on that note, we got Kim, we got Ross, co-founder and partner at McGill Wealth Management, really setting the direction for a lot of the growth and where MJWM is heading. And then the great Frank Kelly out of DC. And boy, there are a lot of things happening on the consulting side. I do appreciate Frank got off a call yesterday with the head of a very large private equity firm, and he said Ed's on the other line, and we got to go over the agenda. No, he made me wait, which he should have. So when you told me the person's name, I was like, yeah, I would have made me wait too. So a lot of great stuff we're going to cover today, Frank. So welcome again for the fifth time attendee of Ask the Experts. So
Fifth time. Everybody, I told if anybody watches Saturday Night Live still, if you're a five-timer on Saturday Night Live, you get this really cool smoking jacket. They, and all the other five-timers show up and they give it to you. So, Ed, I'll be flying out. We'll have the ceremony. The McGill Jungie smoking jacket, five-timer.
I think, well, you do like your cigars, so I'm sure there's one back there. So probably the biggest question of the day that everyone wanted to know about was, where is Nancy Guthrie? I'm just kidding. That was not. But that, it's funny when we think of the Iran war and the
Oh,
stuff going on, it makes me think a little bit of that when, and that is tragic that they still don't have any answers. But you remember every night for a while, it was on the news and it was, well, they found this, they're going to catch the person next week. They found that this is going to happen within 24 hours. And now, and it almost feels the same way I saw today. We were day 60 of the ceasefire. But we're going to skip Iran and the U.S. here first, Frank, because there's something else I heard today, which ties to you. Is
I didn't do it.
no, okay, good. But you have spoke in the past about just you being on the GLP-1s and
Yes.
the impact that that's had on you and others. But today, when I was on the Peloton, I heard that they're seeing now that it's either reducing or slowing down or preventing cancer now, too.
Yes.
I heard on that. So maybe why don't we start with some of the positive things coming in healthcare and we'll move to some more of the more serious topics on that side. But maybe start there with just your experience with GLP-1 and then some of the changes in a positive way just in healthcare in general right now.
Absolutely. So, I'm going to start this out by saying I think it's something that's sort of my theory for everything that we're going to discuss today. Even, there's so much darkness in the world and people are worried about this and that. I think what people are missing is the power of the capital markets. And it is the retail capital markets,
Hmm.
right? Yes, big institutions moving money and everything else, but the power of capital markets to improve our lives and to mitigate risk is not truly understood anymore. And I'm saying anymore. I think we're in a new place historically that people are able to learn faster, study things faster, and then they put their money to it because it's what they've got, right? Whether it's a 20, I have $50 I'd like to invest in this because I think it's a good thing and it can change things and it will have a good impact on me. Or maybe it's $5 million or 50. So I'm going to try and keep coming back to that. And I'm not being Pollyannish. Everything is, don't worry about it. No, there's a lot of things we got to worry about. But GLPs are the perfect example of this, right? In that what we had effectively, I'm not an expert, certainly in science and biology and medicine, and probably my high school biology teacher would have a stroke wherever that poor man is that I'm even talking about this. But I started out on a GLP and I've told this story many times. My doctor had told me, look, you're 58, 59 years old, you're 310 pounds, and you're 6'3", and you don't exercise, and you smoke cigars, and you're working like a lunatic. You're gonna die. So we're gonna make some changes. And I'm thinking, oh, great. I'm gonna have to be put on some severe diet, and I'm gonna have to work out all the time, and my life's gonna be miserable. And I won't lose the weight, right? I'm too old. He said, I'm going to put you on this thing. It's a GLP. It's called Monjurno.
And that
And it's
was
going to
2 years ago.
that was it was July of 2023.
23. Okay. So coming up on 3 years. Yeah.
And between that first week in July of 2023 and Christmas of 2023, I lost 70 pounds. It fell off me. I didn't, I was exercising more because I was having more, as I lost the weight, I felt more energetic. I felt better. I wasn't dieting, but what it did was suppress my appetite. So I wasn't anxiety eating. I wasn't eating garbage in an airport when I was traveling. And I travel all the time, as you know, Ed. And weirdly, it also has a modification thing. And I can't explain the science of this. I don't like processed food anymore. I just didn't like it. I didn't eat at McDonald's anymore. I mean, I was the customer of the year for like 50 years globally, right? And I don't like McDonald's anymore. It actually tastes like I'm putting, I used to love those French fries. I put the French fries in my mouth, and it tastes like I'm eating a piece of paper, right?
Huh.
And it's weird. And so I'm now eating more healthily. So look, it was expensive. It was $1,300 a month out of pocket because insurance didn't cover it. Thank God I was blessed to have the ability to pay for it. Long story short, I've kept that weight off. I'm down 80 pounds. I'm doing 10,000 plus steps a day just naturally because I want to move around. And then I see the other things where, my doctor takes me off statins for the first time in 25 years. My blood pressure is perfect. All of my numbers are perfect. I just turned 62. And wow, right? And then you're seeing the price has just plummeted because the capital markets jumped into this. People invested in this. I'm not here to pump stocks. I'm not here to even talk, but you talk about this better than I can. I'll flip it to you. Just look at the Eli Lilly stock, right? The performance there. Why? Mangiano and all the other guys, right? And there's a lot of science behind this because it was originally for diabetes. So they were using the core of it for diabetes control for years, and this is what it has led to. And now, as you're pointing out, there's study after study about how it's retarding cancer. It is also studies that are showing what it's doing to slow down or block Alzheimer's. And I've talked about this before, Ed. You've heard me like a broken record. I had an experience last summer. So last summer, I was in Mexico City talking to a state pension head of a biggest state, the largest pension plan in Mexico. And they're fascinated by this. They're investing in this because the derivatives of these GLPs, because it's an appetite suppressant, it therefore it's being proved to reduce your appetite for cocaine, fentanyl, alcohol, right? It's helping these people. They're investing in that because, as he said to me, if we can reduce demand in the United States and see that demand, that's how we get the cartels here in Mexico under control. The power of capital markets. And as you know, you're seeing now, I think Eli Lilly, one of the creditors, they're coming out with like a daily pill. You don't even have to take a shot anymore. And the shots are tiny little shots and they're painless. But holy cow. And now the US government, the insurance folks are covering this. So we're going to start seeing a plunge in healthcare costs and we're going to live longer. And it's amazing. So,
And are you seeing then that as clients think about not only how it affects them health wise, but just markets in general and rising healthcare cost, when you look at just GDP and those costs, that it is starting, are we starting to see a little bending of the curve? Because I think it's 1 in 7 people now are on these. So that should mean less heart attacks, less
right.
cholesterol, less strokes and different things. Are we seeing a bending of that incredibly fast curve?
I think, look, you guys are much better readers of the charts than I am, but I think if you look really closely, you're beginning to see that arc. It's beginning to bend. And as you say, 1 in 7 Americans is on a GLP. 1 in 5 has been on a GLP at some point. 20% of this country. We just are just at the beginning of this. 1 in 6 people in the United Kingdom are on GLPs. It's
Hmm.
a global phenomenon, right? So the war on obesity has effectively been won. Now it's just making sure it's spread out there and what it does for all of these other illnesses. Now, there's a counter effect to that, and that's where you and Ross come in. People are going to live longer. They got a plan, and we didn't set this up, folks. I'm just saying this. You're going to like, and I've said this many times. I did this, my doctor, and I came back in. It's fantastic. You're going to live an extra 10, 20 years. You've just added that to your life. And I told my financial advisor, and his response was, "Oh, we didn't plan for that. Let's plan for that, right? We're going to live longer."
That's interesting. Are you seeing, last thing here on this then too, take the political side out of it, but with healthcare, some of the things they're trying to push of bringing down drug costs. And then you saw I did watch that documentary right before Joe Rogan and some of the Navy SEALs ended up there with the fast track of the psychedelics through the FDA, it's helping with some of the depression, CTE type things. Are some of these actually truly happening where we're seeing the drug costs go down and because that helps consumers, to create more spendable dollars.
Yes, it helps consumers. I think we're beginning to see that arc flatline and hopefully going down. And I think this is why President Trump has forced, he's created through his Trump RX or whatever it's called, right? I don't know how effective that is. There people argue that's not going to really be that big a deal. But you know what? Many times it's the bully pulpit of the presidency. Just by him doing this, it encourages the industry to do more itself, right? So you're beginning to see that, and you are seeing people they're healthier. It's shocking how many people that I see. Yeah, I can tell. We can kind of see each other. We know who's on a GLP. You're sort of, wow, you really thinned out, and they're like, oh yeah, I've been running marathons every day. No, you haven't. You're on the shot too. I know it, right? But you start hearing they're much healthier.
No, that's true. And if we do switch gears now more worldwide, Brandon, again from Exodus 51, asked a great question, and I'll just read it. How do you see the tensions with Iran and oil instability affecting vulnerable populations in places like Pakistan, especially regarding poverty and bonded labor? Or more broadly, do you think increasing global instability is causing nations to become more fragile internally, even if they appear stable on the surface? So this oil instability, what's it really doing, worldwide? What are you seeing right now?
It's a great question, Brandon. You have a lot of experience in the region, certainly much more than I do. And God bless you for all the work that you've done freeing people, giving them a life. Um, Look, yes, it is creating an immediate risk in two fronts. You're seeing we're not feeling it here. I mean, yeah, nobody's happy with the increase in gasoline prices, but it's nothing compared to places like Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, right? Where they're like starting to ration fuel, and it's fuel of any sort, whether it's diesel and gasoline, or it's even fuel for cooking. India has been really hit with this. And it goes beyond that because it's also all of the derivatives from oil. I can't remember the name of it because again, I didn't do well in chemistry and biology, but there's a derivative that comes out of oil that is used as the adhesive to hold together asphalt. So when you're paving roads, this is what keeps it together, right? And well, India, which has been on a massive tear in terms of infrastructure development, has basically had to stop paving roads. So that's throwing people out of work. It's because they can't get this stuff because it's not coming through the Strait of Hormuz. I would argue also the biggest risk here is the fertilizer aspect, because
Mm.
something like 50% of the components for fertilizers comes through the Strait, and that's been held up. And that's gravely going to be impacting Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, parts of northern Africa, and Southeast Asia in a big way. Now, that being said, back to my theme about the capital markets, it's not a cure-all, don't get me wrong, but it is very interesting to see while a lot of people are sort of frozen staring at this and scared, you are watching a huge diversification taking place. And I was in meeting with the senior management of, I won't name them, but they're one of the three largest chemical companies in the world. And I was in last week meeting with them. And when they walked me through how they are major, they create everything I've just discussed, whether it's the adhesives, oh my goodness, they're just figuring out new ways of building new facilities in all of these regions because now it's opening up a market and they're able to move money at the speed of light, literally. And so, yes, this is a huge risk. It's dangerous for these countries. It's a threat to all these people. But the capital markets stepping in, investing with these companies, we can move so much faster. On Pakistan itself, though, look, Pakistan is always, it's a complicated place and they do things that we probably wouldn't be happy with. Here they're negotiating on our behalf with the Iranians, and they've just also simultaneously sealed a deal over overland oil and gas delivery from Iran to Pakistan, because they've been one of the most adversely hit countries in the world. Well, they've turned around and cut a deal with the Iranians and as well as Iraq. So, and that's going to come through pipes as opposed to shipping. But yeah, this is a huge risk. And then the question is, how fast can the markets and companies adopt? And it's a lot faster than it would have been 5 years ago and certainly 20 years ago.
Hmm, that's interesting. When we shift gears, we'll keep going back from international to US and international to US. Ross, I know you had a question just on taxes on that side.
Yeah, just as we see the markets kind of grappling with interest rates having to deal with a little higher inflation here recently, partly because of the higher oil prices. We've got a new Fed president that's taken over. You know, we think about tax legislation and how we're going to continue to deal with this the growing debt in the background. What are you hearing, seeing, thinking? Give us some of your insights on, especially around the tax legislation and some of the things coming down the tracks there.
Well, we've had this huge, people have been getting to some degree or large degree benefits of tax refunds because of the one big beautiful bill. And we saw that coming in certainly in the spring. I guess there's still, you guys would know better than I, but it's still coming in. But of course, inflation going up, that kind of eats into how large it is. And I saw, I think it was a Wall Street Journal piece today, that it was one of the smallest amounts of tax refunds that we've seen in a number of years when they were expecting. I think it's broader, but it's not as deep. So Congress is trying to figure out what to do in terms of juicing the economy, if you will. And certainly in an election year, there's no greater spur for them to want to do something. So two things that they're looking to do immediately is two more. It won't be on the size of one big beautiful bill, but they're what known as reconciliation bills. And this is where you can't filibuster, but they have to. Democrats can't filibuster or block it, but it can only deal with budget, tax, or deficit. Mm. They're trying to get one done by early July, believe it or not, but that would just be the 2027 budget. That would deliver probably a lot of money to, you bringing home the bacon that these guys would be finding ways, appropriations. So driving up the deficit, no deficit reduction there. They're looking at doing, believe it or not, a third one that they would do this fall that would have more, that they would come back to any number of, I'm told there's anywhere between 50 to 75 tax provisions they didn't pick up or deal with in the first one big beautiful bill that could be much more helpful to individuals out there and sort of basically delivering the ultimate bacon, if you will, to voters just in advance of the elections, right? I mean, I'm not bashing Republicans for doing it. Any party would do it, right? This is how you get yourself reelected. So they're looking to do that. Add to that, they are looking beyond the tax side. They're looking at a major housing bill they just passed in the House of Representatives that was very bipartisan that would ease any number of restrictions that it would loosen up hopefully the housing market and right and see if we can improve housing on construction. One of the things it would do is it would partially prohibit large institutional investors from buying single family homes, right? Some of the biggest private equity and big asset management, they'd be blocked from doing that effectively, but in a limited way. Yes, they can do it, but not as much as originally drafted and not as much as President Trump was calling for, which was essentially Trump wanted to do that. So they're trying to do that. Um, and they're trying to figure out anything else that deals with the issue of affordability. But I will say this, Ross, they're running out of time. Yes, it's not even June yet, but the congressional calendar, if you look it up, you can Google, what is the congressional calendar, and you'll see it. They're probably only in session for probably another 45 days maximum, maybe just 30 to 45 days, because they take so much time off to go home and campaign. So there's that. Add to that the Fed. So we have Kevin Warsh coming in. I first met Kevin, oh my goodness, in the George W. Bush administration. He's working for him in his Council of Economic Advisors. Look, he's in a tough place because he's got the president wanting him to cut rates, and you've got the rest of the board, the Fed board. No, they're not there. So I'm going to guess that what we're going to see in the June meeting is stalemate. There will be no cutting or raising. But if the Iran situation isn't solved, or we don't have greater, see end at the light of the tunnel, they're probably going to be signaling we may have to raise rates a quarter point. We may have to start moving in that direction. If it goes the other way, I think we could see cuts on the horizon, not immediately, but one big, another a Fed cut of some sort between now and the end of the year. But Warsh is in a tough place, right? And to the deficit issue, nobody talks. It's an election year. I mean, Ed asked me this question the other day. It's kind of like somebody from the Temperance League showing up at a wild bachelor party and to tell them, hey guys, could you gather around? Let me tell you about the evils of alcohol. Get out, right? You are so unwelcome right now. We may start talking about this next year, but I don't know. There is a way, believe it or not, that President Trump has devised to deal with the deficit. And I don't know why they haven't launched it. And that is actually the creation of the sovereign wealth fund. Do you want me to explain that?
Sure. Yeah. Because I think that that's a big thing for everyone, regardless of, I think you're correct that in an election year, Trump doesn't care about the debt. He cares about how he's perceived. And that isn't going to get him love, like creating whatever it is he wants to create.
Yeah. I mean, he's got to do something, right? I'm not political. I'm not getting pro, con. There was a Fox News poll. Fox News came out today. He's at 29% approval rating on how he's handling the economy, and at 24% approval rating on how he's handling inflation. Good grief. You got to do something. You got to do something fast because that becomes a drag on every congressional, senatorial, and gubernatorial race for a Republican. The sovereign wealth fund thing, believe it or not, a year ago, almost as soon as they came in, they hired up a team at the Treasury Department to put together a plan for a sovereign wealth fund. And I've talked about this ever since. And I know from senior Treasury officials who've told me everything I'm about to tell you, this is how it would work. Most people laugh because sovereign wealth funds are usually funded in other countries with a budgetary surplus. We certainly don't have that, right? Anything but. But the way to do it is the following. You move all of the precious metals and gold in Fort Knox and that we hold in other places like Fort Knox. That'd be almost $1 trillion. Move it in the sovereign wealth fund. You have 400 to 500 billion dollars of seized crypto assets that the U.S. Treasury holds, right? They've been taken from criminal enterprises from North Korea and America. What do you do with it? Put it in the sovereign wealth fund. You have a exchange stabilization fund that was used in years past, decades ago, to make sure that the dollar was stable. We don't need it. That's $300 billion. Put it in there. You sell off more federal land. You move to privatize Freddie and Fannie, the big mortgage companies. That would help with the housing market overall, but you hold 20% of it in the sovereign wealth fund in equities. And then what are we doing with all of these companies where the US government's taking an equity stake, the 15% equity stake in Intel? I mean, Ed, unless you've got the secret to tell us that Donald Trump called you and opened an account. Hey, Ross, Ed, I need to open an account for the US government to hold 15% of Intel and like 10 other companies that they've taken equity stakes in. It's being held somewhere, but you need to put it in an actual fund, throw it in there. All of a sudden, you're at $1, $2 trillion. And you use the spin-off of that, right? The revenue, the plan would be 75% of that, the revenue on an annual basis would be spent to pay down the deficit, 25% to spend on national infrastructure issues. And then there's one other big potential addition to this. President Trump and all the trade stuff, sorry I'm talking so much, but he's doing something very unique here on trade. And I'm going to pick on Japan as the example. He said to the Japanese, look, we can argue about how many cars you sell here and how many washing machines we sell there and blah, 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 all the little knick-knack, details of trade. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to cut us a check for $550 billion. And we're going to do these things and we're going to call it even. Literally, I mean, think Happy Gilmore, right? The big, the PGA Tour. Here's a Donald Trump with a big check. 500. Japanese have agreed to this. South Korea, we want 350 billion. Wait, what? That's kind of getting us close to $1 trillion just with two countries. You put that in the sovereign wealth fund. So suddenly you start doing this other major markets. I can see us suddenly having a $5 to $10 trillion sovereign wealth fund. That's a lot of money to help start paying down the deficit.
That's interesting. We'll keep our eyes on that because I have heard that before, but you're right. It just kind of gets buried or you haven't seen much.
The plan is literally sitting on a shelf at the Treasury Department. It is done. They just haven't gotten around to launching because it's just been one crisis after the other.
Yeah, unfortunately, some self-inflicted. Speaking of crisis, Jason, our director of investments, asked, because this ties to something we talked about yesterday, where you said Ukraine's kind of flipped it and actually winning. But Jason asked, what do you make of the recent call between Rubio and Lavrov, where Russia pretty much said they'll be stepping up their attacks on Kiev? But yesterday you were saying that it's kind of flipped right now, where Ukraine is winning.
It is. Ukraine is winning. They are actually winning the war. And there is no greater example of the power of the capital markets, this theme that I'm talking about. So Lavrov is calling because he's trying to scare everybody. Look, he did this with other leaders throughout Europe and elsewhere. You better get your embassies out of here. Hey, pal, you attack our embassies. That is our U.S. embassy in Kiev is actually U.S. ground. That you're attacking the United States of America. He's not going to do it. They're not going to do it. Right? But they're trying to rattle people. Since we talked yesterday, Ed, it's come out this morning that the Russians are so desperate for troops that they have not instituted a draft. They've been paying huge bounties. If you want to go fight and die, they'll pay you. Putin is now instituting a nationwide draft. That's going to be about as popular as, a skunk at a wedding. 92% of Russian soldiers sent to the front either end up dead or wounded. 92%. Ukrainians aren't having that. So what is happening here is, and back to my capital markets thing, sorry, cut me off if I'm talking too much. This is a perfect example of this. A month ago, I had breakfast with a woman who runs the largest private equity firm a venture capital firm in Ukraine. A friend of mine asked me to come, and I'm thinking, who's doing venture capital in Ukraine in the middle of a war? She is. And this is how she's a very seasoned, very experienced and successful venture capitalist, most of it here in the United States and Europe. She went home to Ukraine. This is how she's contributing and fighting the war. all of her investments are drone focused, either actual drones, flying drones, or underwater drones, which have been extremely effective, or the software, or the weaponry that is attached, right? It's incredible tech. She has 21 companies in her portfolio. 9 of them are unicorns. 9 of them are valued at over $1 billion. One just was listed on the NASDAQ last month, doing very well. Her largest investors are the biggest venture capital funds in California. Eric Schmidt, the founder of Google, is one of her largest investors. The government of Germany, the government of Denmark, and others. It's incredible. And why is this? What does this matter? The Ukrainians are fighting this entire war not with soldiers anymore, but with technicians flying drones. And Ed, I told you this story, and it is worth everybody. We had a moment in human history that was very important last month. A Ukrainian force attacked a Russian position. They surrounded them tactically, strategically, executed perfectly. And you can watch the video of 40 Russian soldiers coming out and surrendering, multiple Russian casualties, and not a single Ukrainian soldier was physically present. The entire attack was conducted using drones in a concerted way and on the ground robots. You're watching 40 Russian soldiers surrender to robots. It's extraordinary, the technological change. And so what has happened? It's like I've said, it's the Eric Schmidts and others. They're investing in, the technological expertise. The Ukrainians are now far more advanced than the Russians technology-wise, and this is how they're beating them. They've taken more land from the Russians than the Russians have taken in the last year. They recouped it all. Russia is retreating. This is what's happening, but it's the capital markets coming in. And what does this mean for the Ukrainians? Yes, they want some more aid from us. They want some more Patriot, but they're not Patriot missiles. They're not asking for another $1 billion. They don't need it. They need specialized things like Patriot. One last thing. After the Iran war broke out, you saw President Zelensky of Ukraine show up in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, right? All the Gulf states. He went to Jordan. He even went to Israel. People thought he was there to ask for money. No, he was selling. He was there selling Ukrainian drone technology to these countries to defend themselves against Iran. They're making a profit at this point. They are funding themselves. This is what I'm talking about, the capital markets. These are the extraordinary things that are changing right under right in front of our faces.
That is pretty wild on that. And if we switch gears, because that technically ties a little bit to AI. Todd Robinson asked, what are your thoughts on the impact of AI over the next 5, 10, 20 years, which, can be such a wide kind of range in there. But you made a comment about you keep seeing all the company or the headline saying such and such is laying off X number of people, but you're saying you're seeing some things differently with your business owner clients.
Look at the unemployment rate. I mean, what is it now? We're not seeing unemployment spiking because people are being laid off for AI. And I continue to hear story after story of, yeah, there is some trimming here and there. And AI is replacing some middle management functions or administrative functions, but not on a massive scale. But it's now becoming a tool to be used, not the master of us, the replacer of us, right? And I think that's really what I'm seeing here. That yes, people are worried about this. I mean, you've got Pope Leo writing a very interesting and quite engaging, thoughtful, encyclical letter to the world about AI. Let's not lose our humanity because of this. And I think it goes. He's also speaking beyond AI. He's talking about social media and right. Let's not just think that we have a relationship with somebody because we text them every other day, but we actually never talk to them, see them, engage with them as humans. Right? There's that. But I think AI is. I think there's a couple of things to watch for. And in talking to CEOs and others, One, we're probably going to see a shakeout in AI. There's a lot of AI companies. There's going to be winners, there's going to be losers. Some are going to buy the others, right? We're not going to have 20 different AIs. Um, I was talking to a friend of mine who's in the financial advice. He's a research guy in finance, and his colleague wrote something, and he was talking about a certain stock index in it, and he then checked it on Copilot, the Microsoft, and oh, yep, the data was correct. And then he then double checked it on OpenAI, and oh yeah, it's correct. Well, Copilot gets all this information from OpenAI. So the point being, right? He's double checking with the same source, right? So I think that there's going to have to be a winnowing down of that to a certain degree. And but again, all the research I'm seeing is we're not seeing the huge impact, certainly not yet, of destroying the labor force like we thought. I think it's most harmful, though, if it is hurting anywhere, it's the under 30 crowd, the college graduates,
Yeah.
the MBAs, right? My daughter graduated 2 years ago from the University of North Carolina School of Business, a fantastic business school. She told me the other day she thinks it's like 30% of that class still does not have a full-time job. They're doing gig work.
I would agree that that's what you've seen, or yeah, listened to an attorney that said, yeah, I replaced the paralegal, the research analyst, that entry level job where you get your foot in the door and people see who's hungry, who's doing well, and then they, um, on that, side that they're just being. That's where you're seeing that. Ross, I know you had a question on data centers, and then I do want to come back to Iran at the end, Frank, because just some of the thoughts there and what this is meaning for just us, because it is hurting on the gas pumps. But Ross, I know you had a question on data centers. Oh, but you're on mute though, so you can't ask when you're.
Oops, yeah. So the question revolves around the massive capital spending build out that's happening. It's been going on for a couple of years. It's picking up steam. You've got Elon Musk talking about doing it in outer space. You got pushback from some of the states and local communities that don't want all these data centers, chewing up all their energy, using up their water, et cetera, et cetera. And it's contributing positively, to the tune of about 1% to GDP at this point, as far as all that build out and all that investment, capital investment. Maybe just share your thoughts, comments, things you're hearing on that front looking forward.
Well, the data center thing is fascinating to see how fast it has become a political issue. Where
Mhm.
like the state of Maine basically banning data centers being built. And I live in Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., where we're literally the data center capital of the world. There's more data centers 15 minutes from my house in Loudoun County than anywhere in the United States. And they just keep building. There's two massive data. Bloomberg was just doing a story this morning on these two monstrously big data centers down in Richmond, Virginia. So between Washington, D.C. and Richmond, Virginia, it's just data centers and the energy that's required for that. But it's laid bare the problem that we do not have a good energy system in this country, and we don't have a grid system that is where it should be. It's kind of third world grid system. And again, that is where I think the capital markets are beginning to move. I'm not saying this is the answer to everything, but there's enough people who are complaining, scared, and everything else, than the other people who are like, wait a minute, there's an opportunity. And they're moving and moving fast. So you're beginning to see the build out more of nuclear power, and the U.S. government, Trump administration doing this. The Department of Defense is building a micro nuclear reactor on a military base in Texas. And it's going to power the base, but they're going to sell a huge, they don't need half of it, and they're going to sell it into the grid. But the point of them doing this is because they can do it. And they're trying to spur everybody else to say, we'll be the first mover, see what a micro nuclear facility is like. Why aren't you building it? Plus, you have all these other companies, whether it's BlackRock or Amazon or Microsoft, right? They all want to start building their own nuclear facilities. So the pressure point is there, and that requires as well. rebuilding the grid because all of the wiring in this country is ancient. It needs to be changed. That's going to be another huge investment opportunity, right? And AI can't do that. You're going to need linemen, you're going to need engineer. So these are the huge opportunities. And again, the money is moving and it's going to keep moving that way. But Ross, you also bring up a very interesting point about Elon Musk. Um, he wants to put 1 million data centers in space. And Peter Thiel, who was his buddy in founding PayPal and a number of other tech companies, he is moving to, we announced, I think last week, building data centers underwater in the ocean. And you use the power of the currents to for the energy, and it's a coolant. I'm told Microsoft already has one of them operating, right?
Wow.
So we're seeing these are huge shifts, but you've got to think of the technology that goes into building this out. And I'm aware that the US government is actually, the intelligence services actually have data centers in space. And I believe that Elon Musk was the one who delivered the payload into space. That was done a year to 2 years ago, at least. So he knows what he's talking about. He's seen it, and that's where we're going on SpaceX, which, as a friend of mine who works in an intelligence agency said to me, people never understood why Donald Trump created Space Force, and everybody laughs at it. This is why Space Force was created, to protect the commercialization of outer space, which is going to come at us very fast. But again, the investment opportunities are going to be extraordinary. They're going to be extraordinary.
Hmm. That is Elon. Wow, that is pretty amazing to think about, what's coming and it is interesting when you talk about capitalism, just how many things are driving, the markets that with all this uncertainty that we kind of started with and some of the geopolitical issues, the US economy and businesses seem to be very, very resilient. And sometimes if people could get out of their own way, we'd actually see probably a huge, explosion that the country wants to run and run fast. And there's just too many, as you said, crises along the way. So let's kind of end on that that crisis there because like I said, I think it's day 60 of the ceasefire. It doesn't seem to have any necessarily end in sight. Trump will naturally try to spin a win somehow, even if these things don't happen that they say they need to happen. And then it's like, okay, did we really do all of this for what did we actually gain? What are you seeing as the end game here? And who's really feeling the pressure? Is it the midterms and everyone's now really pressing on anyone in the administration? Are any of the sanctions and things working? Ryan, I know you're friends with Scott Bessent, and he came out and said, their economy is, on the brink. But again, we've been hearing that for whether it be a week or 2 weeks, or their storage facilities are going to fill up and different pieces. What's kind of the end game here? What are your people saying?
So I think the real sad thing here is, and this goes to Brandon's question earlier about Pakistan and what's happening, particularly the average person in some of these poor countries, right? But the bottom line is the Iranian leadership could care less about their people. They just killed 50,000 of them in the streets earlier this year when they came out to protest about the economic situation. Iran is more like North Korea than it is anything else. They don't care. They're clinging to power. They run huge black market operations. I'm sure you could get Brandon on here to talk about that as well, what he's seen in all of his good work, right? So they will do whatever they can to hold on to power. They are, not to mix my cultural metaphors, the Iranians are kind of like kamikazes. If we
Hmm.
die, we die. So they're willing to hold the rest of the world at gunpoint, literally. It's also a very fragmented political system, if you will, with the generals and the Revolutionary Guard doing their own thing. So here you have breaking news earlier today that there is the Iranians have agreed with the US in principle on something. Okay. And then the next thing that comes out is a ballistic missiles fired from Iran at Kuwait. And the Kuwaitis shot it down. And then there was multiple drone attacks coming in. What this is schizophrenic. You're this close supposedly to peace, and that goes to show there's not a controlling factor within Iran solely, right? And the more hardline, radical military types, this is probably their way of saying we don't like this deal that's being constructed. How do we get through this? It's going to be hard. I think this is probably going to be a series of the deal that they're talking about is like a 60-day ceasefire and opening up the strait, and probably in return loosening some sanctions on the Iranians. But I think this is what we're going to get into. There's not going to be a final deal. It's going to be 60 days, 100 days. Let's just keep working at this and make sure that we're not at a wholesale war, because there's no good options for the United States at this point. We can't put troops on the ground because it would be a very bloody battle. They've got an enormous army, and like I said, a military is willing to do anything. They've got 75% of their ballistic missiles survived, and there's estimates they've got as many as 10,000 of them. They've got 40,000 drones that are in reserve and ready to go, and they are manufacturing their drones again. Back to the issue of Ukraine. When you see those drones flying in from Russia and hitting Kiev and elsewhere, most of them are actually manufactured by the Iranians. They're master drone manufacturers. They're cheap, they're easy, and they're lethal. So this is a problem. I think the end of the day, what we're going to have to end up doing is getting the Europeans with the United States, with Japan, with Korea, with India, with a number of other countries, and most importantly, China, telling Iran, okay, we're done. You can't, you could blow up all the shipping in the strait. You do that, we're all collectively going to just crush you. That's going to take a global effort here. This can't be, the US has to externalize this and make it bigger.
That's interesting. We did have two questions come in, so I want to make sure we cover those. And Ross, I think maybe you did have something on farming and just, the Land O'Lakes CO talking about which affects Iowa and things. But Brandon asked, what are your thoughts on the SpaceX IPO? And Gina said, how concerned should we be about China and Russia adopting robotic warfare?
So the SpaceX IPO is going to be fascinating to watch. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch in one particular way. And markets are sort of paying attention to this, but not as closely as I thought they would. The Securities and Exchange Commission, at the urging of President Trump, is about to formally adopt voluntary new regulation of earnings reports, meaning if a company doesn't want to report quarterly and just do it on the half year, like many European, they do mostly in Europe, you can do it. And the purpose of this is to save all the time and the money that's spent on the accounting, getting reading every 3 months. And so it aimed more to help smaller companies. What happens? I don't know if he's going to do it, but what happens if Elon Musk adopts that? The largest IPO in history, and he decides, I'm just going to report on a half-year basis. That would be a first mover. That would be a massive earthquake, and you'd see a lot of other companies starting to move towards that. So I would watch that carefully. But I think this is, this and some of the AI companies you're going to see come to market. It just goes to show it's going to keep powering the market. And it shows the power of the capital markets in the United States to keep this economy going and end up doing positive things for the world at the end of the day. And I'm sorry, the second question about China and Russia.
Yeah, Gina had asked about adopting robotic warfare, but it sounds like Ukraine's done it against them. But she was asked about China and Russia.
Look, it's something the Chinese are going to have to do. Only because the demographics in China are so bad. Ed, you and I have talked about this for years. You sit there and you look at a country today of 1.4 billion people in China, and by the year 2100, their population is going to be reduced to 450 million people. They won't have the army. I mean, that's still a lot of people, but they're not going to, they're just not going to have the army and the technology by that point. So yes, they're moving more towards robotics, and you have to watch China on robotics because to keep the economy going, and you don't have as many workers, and you've got the age level is so high, right? They need robots to keep the economy going. Russia, not so much. They don't have the technology. They don't have the ability. It's the largest country in the world, and it's what, 190 million people. And by 2100, there'll be like 75 million. They are dead. And it goes to what Brandon is saying. These countries that are posing the biggest threats to our way of life are dying countries. Iran is dying. Their population is dwindling. It's terrible. It's the worst economy in the world, right? Nobody wants to have a child in Iran because right? Russia, same thing. China, same thing. You can't pay people. You cannot pay women to have children in China. And I would argue these other countries as well. You realize in Russia, you can't leave the country because so many people have fled. Millions have fled. Your passport won't let you go. You cannot go to China unless you're given very special. People are trapped. So we're dealing with this demographic shift globally, which is really a driver of a lot of these global crises that we have. So
That's interesting. And Ross, why don't you end just with the last one and we'll be done.
Yeah, can you comment on the kind of the agricultural side of things? We live in Iowa. My family's still involved in farming. We saw an article from the Land O'Lakes CEO talking about the need to help farmers. What's coming down the tracks from a DC standpoint and support? We've had just spent 3 or 4 years of a down economy from an agricultural standpoint. Trump tried to negotiate more soybean sales to China when he was over there. Just, fill us in on your thoughts on this topic.
so first, Congress has to finish up the Farm Bill. The House Representatives, they passed it 224 to 220. Mostly, almost mostly, there was only 16 Democrats who supported it for a variety of reasons. The Senate is going to take this up. They're probably going to get this done before August. And that's going to be basically 400 billion plus for the farming sector. The other big thing that is starting to move, and I heard a lot of noise, even Ed, since I talked to you yesterday, is on E15 ethanol, and really blowing out the ethanol industry, right? In terms of it's always been limited to certain. No, putting in all sorts of new tax advantages for the airline industry, for the trucking industry. If we're not exporting product, then let's turn into ethanol, and this also will help reduce gas prices nationally, right, and travel nationally. We're a blessed country with all the oil and gas. We found fracking when we didn't think it was there. Well, we also are growing above ground, a tremendous energy source. So there's huge pressure to start blowing out, and just take any barriers to ethanol away. So I would watch for that very carefully, because the big problem too is the Chinese, as a retaliatory strike against the U.S. on tariffs, they've just gone to Argentina and Brazil and elsewhere to buy soy and wheat. And those countries, they're cheaper. They don't have the environmental or work standards that we do. And this is one of the big things. So China's buying some of our stuff, but I would point out that despite what the president said, there's no new huge group of purchases coming from China. That could happen, and it could happen this fall. I don't think it's a done deal. I mean, I don't mean it's a full stop. Remember that this was sort of a baseline meeting. Like, let's put a floor under this collapsing relationship between the U.S. and China. And now President Xi is supposed to come over in September. My guess is we're going to see some big agricultural deal emerge at that point, right?
And more where they're just doing it to goodwill to get things that they want, because they could still keep going to Argentina and Venezuela or other places to get stuff. They're like, yeah, we'll give you that. We need that anyway. We're going to pay a little bit more. We're fine with it, but here's what we want. So you get that win.
And the U.S., I would say that you have that with China. But again, it's a diminishing marketplace longer term. And India is going to be really important. I was just reading a very interesting story the other day about, we've got El Nino and El Niña, right? These things that happen with water. It's just it's not even a climate change thing. I'm not arguing that, but it just happens. We're going to have a big El Nino event in Southeast Asia and India as a perfect example. Farmers there are going to get really hit. Well, we still are negotiating a trade deal with India. I have to think that agricultural sales from the United States to India, that will be a huge backstop to that, right? And that's
And
where
a
the market
grow,
will go
yeah,
anyway.
that's a growing market, growing
Yep,
people. Let's help them
yep,
focus there. Let's stabilize things with China, and then we can move to a better market
exactly,
that's growing.
exactly.
That's interesting. Well, everyone, that was the great Frank Kelly and Ross Junge sitting second chair, and Ed just moderating along the way. The next time you see Frank on the 6th, Ask the Experts, he will be in the McGill Junge smoking jacket, could be pajamas, could be yoga outfit now that he's like a lean, we may see him in the Olympics because he's so lean and mean and fast right now. So
The elderly Olympics.
which nothing wrong with that either, though. So you are a true friend of the firm. We love you a ton, my friend, and appreciate our ongoing relationship and friendship. So thanks everyone for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Frank.
everybody. Have a great summer.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Talk
Thanks.
to you soon.